An anonymous coach speaking to Athlon, On 3 just reported this the other day, said something crazy. So the first part he said was Joe Milton is not going to be Hendon Hooker, so the ceiling won't be as high. Okay, you can agree or disagree, but anybody who watched the two play could agree that Joe Milton's ceiling may not be as high as Hooker's. Fair enough. Then he says, quote, they need to develop more depth at wide receiver to stay creative. The system is like a new age option offense where it's just hard as hell to practice it in a single week, and you get burned easily because you're tired. You can't replicate the tempo and pace unless you do it a little bit all season. What in the world is this coach saying to say they need to develop more depth at wide receiver? That's not an issue for them at all, Jaru. Do you think that's an issue?
I guess the only thing he would be saying is because they run up tempo in practice, you don't want your receivers to get tired. But that was not a problem last season. I mean, you had Jalen Hyatt dealt with injury, Cedric Tillman dealt with injury, Bru McCoy dealt with injury for a couple games there, and the wide receivers were still okay. They still had wide receivers on the field and were able to run their offense. So if that doesn't show that they have enough depth, and they picked up more bodies this year. So if they were able to have enough depth last year in Heupel's second year at Tennessee, he was able to have wide receiver depth. I don't understand what this person is talking about. I guess I get where they're coming from, but they're talking about it like they've never seen a Tennessee football game before.
This coach might be Butch Jones. And the reason I say that the reason I say that is the Butch Jones philosophy, and Brian Kelly somewhat adopts this at LSU, and that's fine. But people who use elements of the spread back in the early 2010s, the philosophy was you have to run a lot of receivers in and out to keep them fresh. And so you never really had a go-to receiver. Well, anybody that watches Josh Heupel's offense knows he doesn't do that. He's got 2 or 3 receivers, and that's it. You know what I mean? And he keeps them in the same rotation consistently. I mean, it was so frustrating watching Butch Jones' offense back in the day. One, he never really ran tempo the way he should have at Tennessee. He was too nervous, so Tennessee was huddling up most of the time, even though he said they were going to be a no-huddle offense. And then they never could get a receiver to get into rhythm because they constantly rotated guys in and out, and it just, you never felt that they had the right chemistry because Butch Jones wouldn't stick with guys that were doing it well. I come from the David Cutcliffe, Lane Kiffin philosophy, which I think Heupel employs. And Drew, I want to know where you come in on this. I think you're better off if you have one go-to receiver, 2 other really key receivers, and that's it, pretty much, in rotation.
Yeah, and even then, we see Josh Heupel doesn't like to sub off his running back because it allows the defense to sub. So why would he all of a sudden start rotating his receivers? And, imagine Jalen Hyatt goes for 70 yards for a touchdown last season. And the next time they come out on offense, Heupel's like, no, you need to stay on the bench. That would just be stupid. Your guy just got a touchdown and he's hot. Why would you take him off the field? It's like in baseball, if your best hitter hits a home run and then you tell him he's done. You'll hit again in a couple of days. It doesn't make sense. If you've got, like you said, a go-to wide receiver, make him the go-to wide receiver. I can guarantee that these guys condition enough to deal with the up-tempo offense. Even as a wide receiver, when you're huddling up, it's not that much of a difference because if you think about it, you're running almost 50 yards to the huddle if you're an outside wide receiver. So there's really no break from tempo to a no-huddle offense either. So this is a crazy statement.
Yeah, it's a philosophy that never made sense to me. I never understood why people felt that wide receivers need to be fresher. Wide receivers aren't getting hit every play. They're not tackling every play. They're tackled sometimes when they catch the ball, and that's still a 50-50 proposition because a lot of times they go down and go out of bounds. So this idea that wide receivers get tired the least of anybody on the offensive side of the ball. So I'm sorry, this whole thing is just absolutely ridiculous to me. I think Tennessee, and let's go through the list real quick, Joe. So we're talking Bru McCoy, Ramel Keyton. Anybody who watched Tennessee last year knows Squirrel White's emerging. Dante Thornton is already proven. I just named 4 guys, and that doesn't even count the freshmen and the young guys like Nathan Leacock, who might actually make an impact. Where do they not have depth?
Or you still got the Caleb Webbs or your sophomores who sat last season and learned how to play the offense. And you also have to remember Jalen Hyatt was not running a streak every play. And they still had run plays mixed in where Jalen Hyatt probably would not even move off the line. It just doesn't.
Yep.
I mean, if your wide receivers are burnt out and gassed, how do you think your big guys feel? Like,
Yeah,
how do you think
exactly.
they feel watching a wide receiver sub in because the other guy was tired when they're on their sixth play in 30 seconds? It just doesn't add up. The argument does not make much sense for what they're trying to say here.
And one of the interesting things is because of the wide splits Heupel uses, the wide receivers don't even have to block in Heupel's system, which would actually take out some more stamina. Because quite honestly, there's no reason to block because those cornerbacks guarding the wide receivers are not going to be able to tackle the running back on a running play. So I mean, they're too far away from the line. So the wide receivers have the easiest job in this system. You don't have to block, and you're schemed open. I mean, this is why I think every great wide receiver should want to go to Tennessee. It's the best system to play in for a wide receiver by far.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, you do have to cut the wide receivers some slack. They are running routes most downs. But like you said, a lot of Josh Heupel's drives end up being 10 plays, maybe max 11. And I think that's even pushing it. And then they go sit on the sideline and get to rest, recover. Your wide receivers are not going to be the ones getting it. Maybe at the end of the game, was Jalen Hyatt tired after scoring, 4 or 5 touchdowns against Alabama? Maybe. But I don't think he's tired on the third play of the first quarter to where he's asking for a sub.
Yeah, and I'm still not so sure he was tired because, I mean, again, he only caught 6 passes in that game. 6 passes, 200 yards, 5 touchdowns.
Yeah.
It's kind of a wild. Sorry.
This take is crazy. And then the quote continues, and it's like, when they're up on you, Neyland is a nightmare to play in. That stadium is back to where it used to be. Like, it just doesn't, like, where does that part come in? They threw that part in. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of what was said, it's like I could see it. It makes sense, but also, I'm not so sure it's a new age option offense either. I don't really see I know the quarterback has the option of reading the safety and where to go, but there are not a lot of option running plays here that Tennessee's running. Do you see any of that?
I mean, their wide receivers do have to choose their routes, but I wouldn't say that's as big of a deal as the option. I mean, that's just choosing if the cornerback's on your right, you run left. If the cornerback's on your left, you run right. That's not reading a defensive end or doing anything crazy. I think maybe they just mean sort of like revolutionary, I would guess. That's what I'm saying. Like, none of the stuff that this anonymous coach said to Athlon Sports really adds up in any way. It's kind of weird. And it's funny in the On3 article, the writer goes on at the end to list off all the wide receivers Tennessee has and their stats. Like, Bru McCoy leads the returning group with 667 yards from last year. And then Squirrel White hauled in nearly 500 receiving yards last season. And I don't think he played more than probably 2 full games. So it just doesn't make much sense.
So what we're going to say, I think Jaru and I have agreed the verdict is in, the jury is in. This coach does no ball. This coach isn't a ball guy. Are we agree?
Yeah, it really just seems like he hasn't watched it. I mean, now if somebody said, like, just didn't know that Tennessee had wide receiver depth, then that would be one thing. But he's acting like he hasn't watched a Tennessee game all year or ever, with a Josh Heupel coached game really ever. Talking about the wide receivers burning out because Jalen Hyatt won the award for being one of the best wide receivers in the country, and he played every game, practiced every day. There's just not. I assume there was probably no burnout there for him to continue the way he did.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it made no sense. This came from Butch Jones. And okay, Travis had a great quote. Jaru, this is a good question. I'd love to see a triple option package out of our team. Could you imagine if Tennessee had like running all this tempo and at one point they run the triple option?
They just stick them in they start running the wing tee with wide splits. That would be funny.
That'd be hilarious. Look, I said, I think there's room for the single wing to come back, man. I'm telling you, for those who don't know history, Tennessee, Robert Neyland built Tennessee up by running the single wing in the 1920s. At the time, it was ahead of its time. But then Tennessee fell off because they stuck to it way too long into the 50s and the 60s. So just interesting stuff.